Hey, I'm Mary.
And I'm Jake.
And you're listening to The Fly Angle, the official RDU Airport podcast. Welcome back to The Fly Angle. I'm glad to join you, Jake. Stephanie held it down for our team last episode. It was great.
She did. Yeah, it's good to have you back. It's we have a small but mighty team here,
there
and she filled in dutifully.
She did a great job.
So, Mary, I have a burning question for you.
Okay, I'm ready.
I want to talk about your favorite airport foods. I've been in kind of like a hunger phase this morning, and I think we're going to talk about some airport food on the podcast today.
All right.
What's your favorite food to get at RDU?
Okay, at RDU, I don't know if you've tried it. You may have, because I believe you like La Farm. The new La Farm white chocolate baguette is like life-changing.
Oh, yeah.
It's so good. I can't just have one.
And you can get them to go.
Yes.
I don't know if you know that.
Yes.
I'll get one of the baguettes, the little white chocolate baguettes. If you haven't had these, dear listener, when you go to Terminal 2 Marketplace at La Farm Bakery and Cafe, you can get these and take it right on the plane. It's awesome.
They're so good.
Yeah, freshly baked.
Yes.
You can smell it before you see it.
So good. So when you're going through TSA and you're coming to your gate, it's right there. It's hard to miss. So definitely make sure you try that. And then, I'm always about the beverages.
Yeah.
Mostly coffee, but sometimes other beverages. It depends on what time I'm traveling. And then anytime I go through Chicago, any Chicago airport, I've got to get the popcorn. And I typically will get the mix, and I can't help it. I bring it with me. I'm sure I don't make the people around me happy on the plane, but...
So when you go and watch a movie on the flight, you'll have the popcorn right there.
I'm good to go.
I love it. I never think I've ever actually had the popcorn at
Jake.
At O'Hare.
So good. I mean, I'm so bad that I tell anybody else that's coming or traveling from Chicago, can you bring me some popcorn? So it's good. What about you?
So it's funny you mentioned La Farm. The Croque Madame, they have counterculture coffee from Durham there. So my airport ritual is coffee.
And this is not just when you're traveling.
Yeah. My ritual in life is coffee, but especially on a travel day. Counterculture coffee from right here in Durham is fantastic, and they brew it now. In terms of like meals, if you ever have been to Whiskey River in Terminal 2 down on the concourse, if you've never been there, that's Dale Jr.'s restaurant. They have the mechanical bull on the live music stage. It's great. They have a Southwest burger that just absolutely is fantastic.
Okay.
Mouth-watering good. Will elevate your expectations of airport food. The only other one I can think of, if it's a leisure trip, mind you, airport beers are always a thing, right?
That's right.
I think I've actually said it on the episode we did with Chrissy from Raleigh Brewing. Raleigh Taproom has the Toll, which is their Imperial Stout.
Okay.
Oh my gosh, it's incredible.
I've never tried that, but
So
I can
good.
add it to the list.
Yeah,
Yes.
do it.
There you have it. Let's switch gears a little bit. International flights are on the horizon, finally.
Yeah, there's nothing that screams the glitz and glamour of air travel like flying internationally, and we are so excited to get back some of these international flights and welcome some new ones even.
Exactly.
Let's recap. So today, you can fly from RDU nonstop to Cancun, Mexico. You can fly that via American, Frontier, JetBlue. You also can fly today to Toronto via Air Canada. Starting in May, we're adding one, and that's the Iceland Air nonstop flight. That's their debut service to Reykjavik.
Yes.
Which a lot of us are excited about.
Yes.
And it sounds like tickets are selling really well. They're really excited about bringing that service to RDU.
There's a real fire and ice appeal.
Yeah, that's right. So that flight kicks off May 12th. Less than 1 month later is a really big week for us. Again, let me just mention this up top. All of these dates are fluid. If you're planning on flying on one of them, check with your airline just to make sure that the flight status is up to date. June 1st, Air Canada is bringing Montreal back, one of my favorite cities in the whole wide world.
Beautiful city.
Yeah, you get a little slice of Europe without even having to leave the continent. It's wonderful. And Montrealers, I have to throw the dig in, Montrealers can come down and experience actual real hockey down here in North Carolina, the Carolina Hurricanes. Sorry, guys.
Oh, boy.
And just 2 days later, June 3rd, is the date that American Airlines is planning on bringing back, drum roll please, London.
Yes.
So we are extremely excited about that flight for so many reasons. You've heard us talk about it on the podcast here. That flight has been wildly popular from Raleigh-Durham for a long time, and we are so pleased to bring it back. We've had it circled on the calendar for a long time.
Yes, probably the most often asked question that I received is, when is that flight coming back? That and the next one that's on the horizon, right?
Yeah, so that leaves one big one left, and that's Delta's flight to Paris. We understand that will be coming back late summer. I don't have a hard date on it, but our expectation right now is late summer, early fall. is when we'll get that flight back. But we are anticipating getting it back, and we're very excited about it.
Ready to jet set. We'll shift to headlines. Jake, passenger traffic is continuing its recovery across the U.S., including here at RDU. In January, the airport saw 637,000 passengers, which is more than double the amount of people who flew in January of 2021.
So what's interesting about this to me is, obviously we're continuing this multi-month, now multi-year recovery phase. And you've heard the word restart a lot around the airport. But it is a slower pace of recovery. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about why that is. This time of year, it's a slower travel period. You've got COVID variants that have been on the rise, but thankfully now, like Omicron is a good example, is receding. The case count is dropping. Hospitalizations are dropping. That's obviously good news for everybody, but also for aviation. And then also, finally, just business travel has been extremely slow to return. That's been kind of at the forefront of everybody's mind here and other business-focused airports like RDU. We're just waiting for those people to show up. So.
Yeah, we're ready to shift from that lagging business travel, but also adapt to the new passengers that we're seeing that are traveling more for leisure.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been so great to see more leisure flyers than I think we've ever had. The last time I flew here was for fun, and it was a blast. We had a great time.
Right. And here at RDU, we went through response to recovery and now, as you mentioned, restarting. And along those lines, we are restarting some of our major capital infrastructure projects. And the highlight of it all is the Airport Authority approved an agreement with the FAA for preliminary engineering on the replacement of a primary runway, which is runway 5 left, 23 right.
Yeah, this is a $400 million project.
It's major.
So suffice it to say, this is the flag at the top of the mountain. This is the biggest thing that we are working on. And so I thought maybe we could explain a little bit about what goes into the replacement versus rehabilitation, as you've probably heard on previous episodes about our work to replace this runway. It's at the end of its useful life. It's been open for more than 30 years at this point. It doesn't mean that it's unsafe to fly on, but we have to maintain its safety through rehabilitation. So we've been adding concrete slabs that are 25 by 25 foot slabs to the runway. It's helpful to extend the shelf life of a runway, but it's not a sustainable, you can't do that in perpetuity. So eventually we do have to replace the runway, and that's the plan. But first, what we have to do is complete an environmental assessment. And that is currently underway with the FAA, right, Mary?
That's right. I'm actually a part of that project team, and it's a very in-depth process. It takes some time, but we're glad to get started with that. It was nice to see the recent approval of Balfour Beatty getting awarded the contract for the runway project. This coordination with the FAA and the environmental assessment is where we're at right now.
That's not the only project, as you can imagine, we're working on. There's other work happening, including, for example, the rehabilitation of International Drive. As you're coming into RDU, that's the road to the northwest that kind of comes in towards the terminals. That's over $4 million rehabilitation project for the airport roadways. Those roadways see a lot of vehicles, a lot more traffic than they've ever seen before. So it's important that we keep those up to date just as much as it is the taxiways and the runways.
Exactly. And look for more from us, specifically our team, about those infrastructure projects, the expansion of some of our gates in the terminal. And so these are big projects, big dollar projects. We'll make sure that we keep you looped in right here on the Fly Angle.
Yeah.
All those updates.
Mary, how about some airmail?
I love to hear it.
So today we have a great question. This is from Ethan C., who asks, does RDU have appointments for global entry?
Good question.
Yeah, this is a great question. I think a lot of the listeners are familiar with global entry, but let's kind of recap. First, what is it? Global entry is a U.S. Customs and Border Protection program. It allows expedited clearance for pre-approved low-risk travelers upon arrival in the U.S. At airports, global entry members proceed to kiosks that are specific to that program. They present their machine-readable passport or your permanent resident card. At that point, you just place your fingerprint on the scanner. It verifies your fingerprint. You complete your normal customs declaration, and then you get a receipt from the kiosk, and you go straight to baggage claim and exit. It is a fast program. It is swift, and it's wildly popular, as you can imagine.
Yes.
You have to be pre-approved for that global entry program. As part of that pre-approval, you have to undergo a rigorous background check and ultimately an in-person interview before enrollment.
And it's convenient. And RDU is a location for both TSA PreCheck and global entry, meaning that if you're a part of that program, you can expect to see the global entry kiosk when you arrive back to RDU from an international flight and process through RDU's customs and facilities.
That's right. And so part of that global entry registration process, as I mentioned, is an in-person interview. So while CBP occasionally offers these at RDU, the closest in-person interview center that you're going to see is in Charlotte, at Charlotte Douglas. When you begin your application process, you will be notified in CBP's system of dates for potential in-person interviews. So all that said, we do encourage you to check it out. It's really neat.
It is.
It helps you get through customs. If you've ever been in a long line at customs when you're coming
It's
back
so
from
daunting.
when
It's
you're
so
coming back
daunting.
from an international flight, the last thing you want to do is stand in a long line.
Right.
This is one less line you have to stand in. Pretty great. For our guest this episode, you've read his popular column, The Middle Seat, in the Wall Street Journal. He's published 4 books on aviation. He and others at the Journal share a Pulitzer Prize for their coverage of 9/11, and now he's an instructor of journalism and public policy at Duke University right here in Durham. Welcome to the podcast, Scott McCartney.
Great to be with you guys.
We are so glad to finally connect with you, Scott. I'm going to jump right in. As Jake mentioned, you recently wrapped up your popular Wall Street Journal column. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
The Middle Seat is a huge success, and after more than 25 years on the aviation beat, you're now transitioning. So looking back, what stories stand out to you the most?
I've been thinking about this a lot. I think it was mostly stories about airline operations and airport operations as well. I often thought of the middle seat. My goal was to educate travelers on why things happen. I often joked it was really about why bad things happen to good travelers. And airline operations are endlessly fascinating, and things happen for reasons that travelers would not understand, not realize. The stories about why flights get canceled, why particular flights get canceled. People look around the boarding area and they see 6 passengers and they say, those sons of guns canceled my flights because they didn't sell enough tickets. And it may be that there was a mechanical problem somewhere and they had to cancel a flight. And yes, in fact, the airline did pick your flight to cancel because there were only 6 people on it, or that kind of thing. So I did a lot of stories on that, how airlines recover from storms and all. And when I look back on operations, the story I'm most proud of, the story I did with a colleague, Susan Carey, who covered airlines for forever and ever and ever. And for both of us, the story we were most proud of was when we went back a month after the 9/11 terrorist attacks. We went back into the operations centers for American and United. And I knew the American guys from previous stories, and she knew the United people. And they poured their hearts out. They opened up in an unbelievable way. I think it was incredibly moving, and it was a story we could only do because we had those relationships with those people beforehand, and they trusted us and all. And I look back, the pandemic has been all about airline operations as well, and airplane operations. I sort of had to become an expert in ventilation systems.
Right.
Sure, us too.
Right, exactly. And I have to say too, one of my favorite misses of stories involved an airport where I knew the airport director in Boston very well. And he was very proud of these giant snowplows that they had. They came from Finland. They were, and so the next big snowstorm, he said, "You got to get up here. You got to do a story about the snowplows." And so I got a call from him one day and said, "The big one's coming. Get up here right away." So I, got the last flight into Boston, get there the day ahead of the blizzard that's coming, and the next day, nothing but rain.
Oh, no.
And the amazing thing was we went out, we drove around in the snowplow anyway, and I did the story.
Right.
They joked that anytime there was snow forecast in Boston, they were going to call me because it was the
Had
way
you on
to kill
standby,
the blizzard.
right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, if the goal of the column and your work at the Journal was to educate, it's kind of fitting then that you're now an adjunct journalism instructor at Duke. As a Duke graduate as well, you're familiar with the Triangle and RDU itself. What comes to mind when you think of RDU?
I have always loved the Triangle. It's why I wanted to come back and teach. I love the people. I love the friendliness. I love the North Carolina accent. I love the barbecue. I love the basketball. I love the piney woods. Just the whole feel of the place. It's such an interesting dynamic community with the universities, with the Research Triangle Park. There's so much going on, and it's interesting to see the growth now. When I lived here, it was also I love being close to the mountains, close to the coast. It was perfect.
Yeah, definitely. So switching gears just a little bit, as airports continue to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic, what lasting effects are flyers likely to continue to experience?
I think this is a really serious issue and a really good question. To me, the long-lasting change will be more uncertainty and disruption in travel. I think we've already started to see this when there's a new variant. What governments now do is shut off travel right away. And I think that's going to continue for any kind of sudden disease that crops up or whatever. It'll be the fear of pandemic, and the playbook says the first thing to do is ground all air travel. And that can be very disruptive for people. So when you take a trip abroad, you do have to start now, taking into consideration what happens if everything gets shut down, or what happens if I have 48 hours to get home, or that kind of thing. People who travel internationally now have the uncertainty of, I have to get a negative test. Can't tell you how many people I've heard from who, they never dreamed that they would test positive, but they do test positive, and now they're quarantined for 2 weeks in a foreign country, and that can be extremely disruptive. So I think that uncertainty is really going to play into the travel equation. There are practical measures you can take, different kinds of travel insurance that would actually cover you for these kinds of disruptions, maybe more a regular part of our travel planning, but also just having a backup plan of, what am I going to do if I have to evacuate or if I have to quarantine?
That makes sense. Both Mary and I on previous episodes of this podcast have talked about, we both had trips that were canceled due to pandemic related. And so having to scurry and adjust on the fly is never fun, especially for the layperson.
Yeah, and I think, what's different here is that in the pandemic, the airplane was seen as the carrier of disease, right? It wasn't, we should shut down travel because people might get infected on airplanes because very tight quarters. It was, if I stop all flights from Asia, maybe I can stop the spread of the disease. And so I think that's going to become routine.
I can't help but think about just how you started this interview, and that your intention was to educate travelers, right? And so in the absence of the middle seat, I think the onus does become on airports and an aviation industry to educate travelers, like you just said, to anticipate some of that disruption, which we're not programmed or wired to do that typically, but that is kind of the new norm that you're alluding to.
Yeah, I think so. And some of it's going to be communications. Some of it, the simple things of, why are flights shut down or that kind of thing. Or here I am stranded at the airport. What's the airport going to do for me?
Right.
So prior to the pandemic, RDU relied on a pretty healthy business travel segment, as you probably know. What's the outlook, just broadly, not just RDU, but just in general? What's the outlook for business travel going forward?
Another fascinating question. I actually did a lot of research on this. I was involved in a research project, which was something a little different for me. But when the pandemic started, 3 other airline industry people, and we all sort of knew each other, but not well. And we formed sort of a support group, emotional support group of how we're going to get through this pandemic. And one's a former CEO, one's a consumer advocate, one's a consultant in the business, and I'm the journalist. And we got very frustrated with a whole lot of wild predictions about business travel. So we decided to do some research ourselves, and we started by figuring out the different reasons for business travel. People talk about sales calls, visiting clients and stuff. That's actually a fairly small part of business travel. A lot of business travel is internal company meetings or technical support or all kinds of other functions. Then we looked at each reason for business travel and said, how much could technology replace? Right? We're not going to go to as many internal company meetings and things. They're going to be more Zoom meetings or whatever service you use. And out of that, we came up with a prediction that we felt really good about. That 19 to 36% of business travel was permanently displaced by technology.
Wow.
And I think those are significant numbers. It's been fascinating to see. I've heard from a lot of CEOs. I was with an airline CEO last week who said your numbers are spot on. I heard from several CEOs who believe that, who sort of embraced the research that we did and said, yeah, this feels like what we're seeing. Now, it's hard to tell now because, there's no international business travel to speak of. It's so much displacement right now. Airlines have talked about, we got 60% back from 2019 levels. I think they'll get to 80% back. And there's natural growth to it. But I do think there's a significant portion that has gone away. And we're actually the same group. We're working on sort of an update of it. We were just talking this morning about it. And the new factor in this is climate concerns. And companies saying we are going to reduce our carbon footprint by X%. And how do they do that? Really, the easiest way for companies to do that is to reduce their travel. A lot of their carbon footprint is business travel. And so there's that added pressure. I think there's also added pressure because so many company travel budgets have been reduced. And they're doing fine without a lot of business travel. And so the CFO is going to say, you're not getting the money back for business travel that you once had. All of those pressures mean reduced business travel in the future compared to what we would have had.
It's really transformative. Absolutely. We've seen it up close and personal, but it's interesting to think about what the airport of even a year from today, 5 years from today will look like.
Well, yeah, it's interesting for airports because I think at the same time there's also an increase in leisure travel, right? Mm-hmm. So people are going to be coming through the airport. They may just be going to a different place. It may be more different days, although there's a lot of talk about the blending of business travel and leisure and all of that. It's not the traditional, head out Monday morning and come back Thursday night or that kind of thing. I do think it's probably a more significant change for airlines that have built their business model around business travel, the American United Delta and, the airport clubs, the frequent flyer programs, the layout of the airplane, everything is designed for business travel. If 20% of that is not coming back, then they're going to have a significant change in strategy.
Yeah, the work that the three of you did was fascinating. I had the pleasure of listening to you present some of that, and it is a huge paradigm shift. And along those lines, you express in your final column your fear over the direction that air travel is heading. And I'd love to know more about that. What could be done to change that experience, and what role do you see airports specifically playing?
The fear was that basically the travel is becoming more and more of a slog for people, right? It's less and less fun. Seats on airplanes cram closer together, frequent flyer programs less rewarding, more and more fees and complications and gotchas, and a lot of that is airline related.
Sure.
I think the wearing of masks and the tensions on airplanes and all have really made it a less pleasant experience in a lot of ways. And I do think airports can do a lot to make the travel experience easier. The whole trend we've seen to better amenities and concessions at airports has really made a difference. When I first started coming to RDU, there were still hot dogs on rolling warmers and stuff, and that was what you got for food. It's certainly better now. I think airports can do more. I think we've seen airports put together outdoor seating arrangements or yoga areas or walking routes or just things that you have a captive audience of people who have time on their hands. And so let's give them activities. Or, one of my favorite airports in the world, Changi in Singapore, there's a movie theater. There's there's all kinds of things to do. You just pop in. Now that's expensive, and
that airport is very impressive.
No, it's amazing, and people will decide to connect in Singapore simply because of the airport. Now that's not practical for a lot of U.S. airports that don't have that kind of long haul international business and all. But I think the point is that you have people for sometimes hours on end, give them things to do.
So changing gears a little bit, I'm sure you've seen this news with Boom Supersonic bringing aircraft production to North Carolina right here at PTI. We're wondering what the next big thing all big quote here. Next big thing might be in aviation. What trends are on the rise in your mind?
I think the biggest trend is sustainability. The biggest trend is finding a way to mass produce environmentally sustainable aviation fuel. That's become the major force. You can produce aviation fuel from plants, and that's great from the environment. It's much better than digging oil out of the ground. But it's expensive to do right now, and the quantities are minuscule compared to what's needed. So we need to find ways to mass produce that on an efficient scale, and that'll really change travel in many ways and make it much more accessible to people who are concerned about the environment. The supersonic trend, I'm hopeful. There are environmental concerns with that. I've talked to the boom people quite a bit. I think they have some really interesting design, interesting technology. United's bought into it, Japan Airlines and others. So I think there's a lot of hope for that. But I do worry that moving people faster takes more fuel. And so there's going to be pushback on the environmental aspects.
That makes sense. And with what you said earlier about companies being having a heightened awareness of their carbon footprint, it makes sense.
Right. No, if you're Ernst & Young Consulting and you've said you're going to reduce your carbon footprint by 40% and all, I mean, there's already pressure internally in those companies to say, the carbon footprint of a business class seat is larger than a coach seat. I don't think any of their consultants are going to ride in coach instead of business class simply because of carbon. But if you said, you know what, take the regular airplane instead of boom, that might be. Now that said, with a 100-seat airplane on, if you can get to Tokyo faster, get to London faster, whatever, there's going to be a market for that.
All right, Scott, last question. As a regular RDU flyer, walk us through your travel day rituals. Jake and I like to share with our listeners these things, and we want to hear from a pro.
I'm like every other traveler. I believe in getting there early. I totally believe in technology updates, flight tracking, heavy user of that kind of stuff. I want to know, as soon as the flight gets canceled or whatever, I want to know. I want to get reaccommodated fast, figure that out. I love spending time in airports. I'm endlessly fascinated with airports. My children tease me because I would go places and never leave the airport, right? For stories. And that was a good day, I thought. And they thought it was just ridiculous and crazy. So what I don't like is the rush. I mean, the airport experience, you go from one deadline to another, one line to another, right? You gotta, if it's returning the rental car and then you gotta, get through TSA and it's just, there's a lot of stress to it. So I love just sort of relaxing, doing some people watching, whatever, and enjoying the airport experience.
That's really fun. Do you have a favorite food or beverage that you like to look for at different airports?
Oh, hot dogs aside.
Yeah, hot dogs aside. Right. That's an interesting question. In San Francisco, there was a Cat Cora restaurant where you could get grilled cheese and tomato soup, and it was absolutely delicious. And that was my favorite airport meal, right? Yeah. Comfort food. I'm not a big fast food guy, but I will always go for the egg and cheese bagel. Yeah. Right. That's sort of my go-to.
It's a quintessential airport meal right there.
There you go. Yeah. Scott, it's been such a pleasure talking with you this morning.
Yeah, Scott McCartney, thanks again.
Great to be with you guys. Enjoyed it.
Jake, I'm so happy we had the opportunity to have Scott McCartney on the Fly Angle.
Yeah, when you talk about aviation, I mean, his name has to be at the top in terms of people who have been around the industry for decades. And also just the work that he has done, whether at the Journal or now, educating the minds of tomorrow, Duke. Yeah. Just about how to make the experience better, how to just really educate the public. And kind of, not all that different from what we're trying to do with the podcast, but when you have the mouthpiece of the Wall Street Journal and the top papers in the world, It's really impressive. And he's a fantastic writer.
Yes.
If you have not read any of his books, I encourage you to check it out.
Yes, dig in the archives. Go check out The Middle Seat. I mean, he's just an abundance of information, and he's got a little humor he sneaks in there. I like
he's
it.
pretty funny, huh?
I like it.
So while you're going through the checklist here, we also want to hear your airmail questions. So make sure you submit those to us. You can do that by emailing them to us at communications@rdu.com.
That's right. And don't forget to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Tell a friend. Share with someone who may also enjoy learning and hearing about all things aviation related. And in the meantime, you take care, be safe, and stay well.
See you next time.